Nostradamus and the Planets of Apocalypse by Jason and Breshears, as read by Kevin Stevens, also known as Grendel Dark. Archive 2, Planet Phoenix, Keeper of the Calendar. All certainty, which does not consist in mathematical demonstration, is nothing more than the highest probability. There is no other historical certainty. Voltaire. The entire orbital chronology of planet Phoenix, as it visited the inner solar system every 138 years, is found in When the Sun Darkens. This chapter will only concentrate on those new findings confirming the existence and orbit of Phoenix. In the back of this book is a complete, abbreviated chronological timeline of the orbits of Phoenix and Nibiru. The 4309 BC destruction of the pre-Adamic world was caused by a close Phoenix transit that resulted in the total ruination of the world, and is the subject matter of the ancient Babylonian Enuma Elish tablets, copied from older Sumerian texts that convey that the earth was originally from the deep. This is a reference to the abyss, a region of southern space far south of the ecliptic below the sun we orbit. This early cosmological text relates an ancient solar system cataclysm involving the destruction of planets and their rearrangement. This catastrophe is reflected in the Egyptian Gnostic text called the Trimorphic Protenoia, which conveys that the gods, planets, were made fearsome because the body of ascent, planet emerging from the abyss, was destroyed by a thunder in the deep, the abyss, caused by a great fire, nova, that overturned their thrones. Planets were called thrones by the ancients. These archons, lords of time, i.e. planetary motion, said, "Our entire habitation has been shaken, and the entire circuit of our path of ascent, orbit, has been met with destruction, and the path, orbit, upon which we go." This text depicts an altered planetary orbit. The Gnostics had the advantage of using the famous Library of Alexandria, which was packed with volumes of translations from text all around the known world. Another Gnostic text, discovered among the Nag Hammadi artifacts in 1945, is entitled On the Origin of the World. This text actually names Phoenix and reads that it was a witness against the powers of darkness, a witness against the angels. Phoenix was appointed to remain until the consummation and end by destruction. Phoenix is a witness in the heavens, just as are the sun and the moon, which associates it to a celestial body. Phoenix appears as a sign to the world of what will occur in the end when the sun will darken and the moons cease shining, the oceans becoming agitated as the world erupts in chaos. Planet Phoenix brings with it an extensive strewn field of hundreds of thousands of miles of dust, dirt, small rocks, and ice to gigantic asteroids and glacial masses that break free of its surface when approaching the inner solar system, much of it blanketing Earth. During direct transits, it is this enveloping of debris that darkens the sun. In the mystical traditions published in the Holy Tablets, which cite thousands of references to Sumerian, Akkadian, and Babylonian texts, we learn that the world was inhabited before Adam and Eve, but destroyed when a dust cloud hid the sun, and meteorites fell upon the earth. This ruination is why the beginning of Genesis reads, "And there was darkness over the face of the deep." The same dust cloud that destroyed Earth in 4309 BC will return many times throughout the world's history and was even mentioned by Nostradamus. The Great Flood was caused by a comet collision 7 days after Phoenix transited, darkening the sun. These records, legends, and evidences are provided in When the Sun Darkens and Anunnaki Homeworld. The deluge was a near total destruction of the planet. It occurred in this 1656 year of the Old World's calendar, and the biblical chronologist Stephen Jones dates this event at 2239 BC, precisely in accord with the orbits of Phoenix. The Jews claim that the flood happened in the 1656 year and Augustine wrote this as well. Frank Joseph, in Survivors of Atlantis, provides us with two new pieces of evidence. He claims that an analysis of ancient Chinese traditions using royal chronologies places the Emperor Shun in 2240 BC, 1-year variance, witnessing a large meteor falling from the sky to strike the Earth, followed by a flooding. Further, he claims that in 1998, W. Bruce Massey, an environmental archaeologist with the U.S. Air Force, revealed that the ancient world was plagued by a series of catastrophic cosmic impacts, with one colliding into Earth approximately 2240 BC. Again, this approximate is only 1 year off. French scientists studying the strata below the Middle East found layers of calcite, indicating a cosmic impact or several impacts around 2200 BC. According to Colin Wilson in his Atlantis and Kingdom of the Neanderthals on page 89. For an approximate, this too is rather close. Exactly 552 years after the Great Flood, the planet Phoenix darkened the sun and caused earthquakes that destroyed megalithic cities and monuments all around the world. This sun-darkening episode interrupted a battle between the sons of Jacob and the Amorite-led Canaanite armies, as detailed in the Book of Jasher. Entire civilizations vanished, and even today, their gigantic monuments remain as silent reminders that the level of culture and engineering in antiquity far surpasses that which is currently believed by academia. After When the Sun Darkens was published in 2009, this author read a large book by W.J. Perry on the archaic civilization entitled Children of the Sun, first published in 1923. He provides an overwhelming wealth of knowledge that the ruling families and dynasties around the world during the Bronze Age referred to themselves as Children of the Sun. But then something happened. The entire archaic civilization, which was widespread, erupted into chaos and violence as states began warring with one another, about 1688 BC. This is only 1 year off from this author's previously researched date, see When the Sun Darkens, of 1687 BC for a major Phoenix transit. For Perry, this is amazingly accurate for a man writing of events 36 centuries later. He states that after this date, the regions stopped referring to themselves as Children of the Sun, but he admits he does not know why. As the readers of this author's prior works would know, the ancients lost faith in the sun because it had failed them. What was supposed to be impossible, the sun's loss of power, happened through the mysterious darkening caused by the transit of Phoenix. Interestingly, and entirely coincidental, Perry's book, counting the title page, is exactly 552 pages in length, 552 years being a Phoenix cycle. A Phoenix cycle was 4 orbits of Phoenix, each being 138 years. Equating the blackening of the solar orb with the quakes that leveled their stone cities, the leaders of the archaic civilization no longer used the sun as a dynastic reference. Another important reference to the 1687 BC Phoenix transit was recently found by the author in the writings of Augustine, preserving the chronological histories of the Roman historian Marcus Varro. Argos was a thriving pre-Greek kingdom in the Peloponnesus ruled by King Pharnaces. At this time, the flood of Archaix occurred, a disaster affecting much of the coastal lands around the Mediterranean and Aegean seas. Augustine, citing Varro's Of the Race of the Roman People, wrote, "There occurred a remarkable celestial portent, for Castor records that in the brilliant star Venus, called Vesperogu by Plautus, and the lovely Hesperus by Homer, there occurred a strange prodigy, that it changed its color, size, form, course, which never happened before nor since. Adastrus of Cyzicus and Dion of Naples, famous mathematicians, said that this occurred in the reign of Archaix. That the ancients witnessed a large planetary body approach the Earth cannot be contested, but the assessment that this was the planet Venus is easily challenged. Venus still maintains the same orbit, unchanged for millennia, and never could it come close enough to the Earth for us to notice an increase in size and then for it to return to its former orbital belt. However, the mistake was an easy one to make. Planet Phoenix, on its north to south passage through the inner system, intersects the plane of the ecliptic directly between the orbits of Venus and Earth, which is why it occasionally darkens the Sun, but only in May. Every year, in our planet's trip around the Sun, which is 93 million miles away, we pass through the exact same space in May. Like a celestial clock, this is without fail. Every 138 years, Phoenix passes very close to this region, but if Earth is somewhere else on its orbit around the Sun, we miss it entirely. The ancients noticed that the intruder came from the region of space occupied by Venus, which is closer to the Sun, making the obvious assumption that it was Venus, though it was not. Amazingly, Frank Joseph, in Survivors of Atlantis, makes the astute observation that the Hittites at this time also made the same mistake. In this stunning research, Joseph provides a wealth of data obtained from scientists around the world showing that a massive global disaster occurred approximately 1629 to 1628 BC, 58 to 59 years off. He cites the discovery that in the 9th year of King Amaziduga of the Hittites, the king recorded the appearance of a great celestial body called Ninsiana. Joseph notes that other researchers automatically associate it with the planet Venus. This Ninsiana is none other than Phoenix. In the ancient Egyptian city of On, Anu, Heliopolis, was housed the mansion of the Phoenix, where the Binbin was placed, an old fragment of a meteorite. The Egyptians believed that the disappearances and appearances of the divine Bennu bird, Phoenix, were linked to violent cosmic cycles and to the destruction and rebirth of world ages. An Egyptian papyrus, written in Greek, but dated as a copy from an older text from the time of Amenhotep, reads, "For in the Typhon time the sun is veiled." This dates to 1576 to 1555 BC. That Typhon is etymologically akin to Phoenix is clearly seen. Typhon and Phoenix. The oldest images of the Phoenix were of the date palm, a slender tree in Egypt sacred to the reckoning of times. In fact, date palms were called phoenix palms. This most arcane symbolism regarding the phoenix has been phased down to us through the millennia as in the form of the maypole, when during this month our ancestors sacrificed a victim to placate the gods. This was conducted to thwart disaster, and the fact that it was a ceremony only conducted in May is quite prophetic. It was at this time that Beltane was celebrated widely throughout Celtum, a festival surviving today in Irish tradition that acknowledges the god of death. As 1687 BC was the end of the Archaix civilization and the children of the sun, 552 years after the Great Flood in 2239 BC, counting another 552 years brings us to 1135 BC, when Phoenix transited and darkened the sun again. This was during the reign of Nebuchadnezzar I of Babylon, and an ancient Babylonian tablet in the British Museum, BM 40085, from this period reads, "If on the first day of the month of Nisan, April or May, the sun looks sprinkled with blood and the light is cool, the king will die, and there will be mourning in the country." This seems to be quite prophetic against the Egyptians. In this year, King Seth-Nokti founded the 20th dynasty over Egypt and immediately died right before a terrifying omen. An immense black cloud covered the sky, and the sun turned blood red and disappeared. Day became night, and a rain of dust blanketed the land. This same blanketing of dust was recorded all around the world in 1902 AD, when Phoenix silently passed through the inner solar system, unseen from Earth. The greatest evidence that astronomical knowledge of planet Phoenix was a Bronze Age science is found in Robert Graves' research in The Greek Myths on page 412. He records a startling tradition concerning two brothers who contended over the right to rule the Argives of Mycenae. Graves dates this episode as occurring before 1050 BC and after the Trojan War. As Graves notes elsewhere that he believed the Trojan War occurred around 1184 BC. It did not, having occurred in 1229 BC. We find that he dated the following story as it happened during this 134-year window of time. The story goes that one of the brothers, named Archaix, who was an astronomer, predicted the exact time when the sun would darken. The tradition is very specific that his method of interpretation was mathematical. When the time came and the sun darkened, proving his calculation correct, Archaix was declared the leader of the Argives, and his brother departed. Graves remarks that Socrates took this tradition very seriously, regarding it as evidence in his own theory that there are cycles of vast duration that result in destructions. This means that Socrates believed that Archaix merely deduced the timing when the sun darkened by calculating it from those times it was recorded to darken before. Unfortunately, modern historians always refer to stories like this as evidence of eclipses, which are so much more difficult to predict because the shadow of the moon is so small on the Earth as opposed to the Earth-swallowing shadow of Phoenix. That Archaix predicted the sun darkening event in 1135 BC is chronologically sound, for shortly afterward, the Dorian invasion plunged all of ancient Greece into a dark age. The Archaix account further supports the fact that Thales of Miletus had access to ancient astronomical chronologies of Phoenix, for he accurately predicted the darkening of the sun in 583 BC, exactly 552 years later, as seen in When the Sun Darkens. Phoenix orbited and returned 138 years later in 997 BC. In this year, King David, who ruled over the Israelites, was 42 years old. He led a series of battles against the Philistine and preserved current events in many of his psalms. A passage attributed to David in the book of 2 Samuel reads, "The earth shook and trembled, the foundations of heaven moved and shook, because he was wroth. There went out a smoke out of his nostrils, and fire out of his mouth devoured. He bowed the heavens also, and darkness was under his feet. And he rode upon a cherub, and did fly. He was seen upon the wings of the wind. And he made darkness pavilions round about him, dark waters, and thick clouds of the skies. The Lord thundered from the heavens, and the Most High uttered his voice. And he sent out arrows, and scattered them, and lightnings." In antiquity, the world was considered the footstool of God, so when it was stated that darkness was under his feet, it meant that the world had darkened. The old Semitic peoples, Assyrians, Babylonians, and their predecessors, the Akkadians, all represented Phoenix as a winged disk, sometimes blackened out and sometimes with a small deity riding it. This is the image David provides by describing God upon a cherub. The Israelites looked into the heavens and saw the immense planetary body fly by, blackening out the sun, causing electromagnetic storms, quakes, and falling stars, while blanketing the earth in debris. They quite naturally associated this unbelievable sight with the appearance of their God. In another Old Testament record, in 1 Chronicles 21:16, just prior to a battle with the Philistines, David looked into the heavens and saw the angel of death between heaven and earth, like a sword over Jerusalem. The imagery of a sword is used in Genesis also when describing the fiery, flaming cherub with a flaming sword that blocked man's access back into Eden, which readers of When the Sun Darkens will know occurred in 3895 BC, precisely in conjunction with a phoenix appearance. This was not the beginning of mankind, but the beginning of a very important calendar adopted by ancient men. As Phoenix brought nothing but chaos and destruction, the appellation Angel of Death was rather appropriate. Joseph, in Survivors of Atlantis, contributed to this thesis unknowingly when he cited the findings of scientists who claimed that approximately 1000 BC, 3 years variance, A locally catastrophic impact devastated the Badlands of northern Montana. Phoenix departed the inner system and 138 years later returned in 859 BC during the reign of Shalmaneser III of Assyria. During this time, Israel was ruled by the infamous Queen Jezebel from Phoenicia, who had become queen of Samaria. She hated Elijah the prophet and sought, on more than one occasion, to kill him. Elijah the prophet challenged the prophets of Baal, and his dry sacrifice was incinerated by a mysterious fire from heaven, which was followed days later by an earthquake. In the scriptures, Elijah being taken up into heaven is a strange parallel of what happened to Enoch before the flood. Both prophets are associated with Phoenix. Phoenix returns again 138 years later in 721 BC when Shalmaneser V of Assyria was ruling and carried away the Israelites into captivity. After an extended siege of Samaria, the Israelites were crushed, enslaved, and deported to the east. Though this was a major event in biblical history, this author was disturbed that he could find no records of the appearance of Phoenix in this year. Naturally, the Israelites would not have recorded the event as they were in turmoil and chains. But having now reviewed the writings of Augustine, it is now clear that there is a record of such an event. Citing again from Marcus Varro's History of the Roman People, Augustine relates that toward the end of Romulus's reign over Rome, the sun darkened, and Augustine makes sure that we know it was not an eclipse caused by the moon. He wrote, "For it is sufficiently demonstrated that this later obscuration of the sun did not occur by the natural laws of the heavenly bodies." This admits the darkening was not by the moon. Other ancient writers speak not of an eclipse, but of a sudden storm. This Phoenix transit that blackened the sun occurred in the 32nd year of the reign of Romulus, toward the end of his reign. Planet Phoenix continued on its 138-year orbit and returned in 583 BC, the most well-documented of all the evidences shown in When the Sun Darkens, a darkening of the sun actually predicted by Thales of Miletus. In the record of Herodotus is a battle between the Medes and the Lydians that was stopped in mid-career because the sun mysteriously darkened and terrified both armies, who then concluded a peace treaty. A rock inscription from 583 BC, as Yalikaya is in Asia Minor, is believed by Emanuel Velikovsky to be a memorial of this truce. The king of Media, Cyaxares, with King Nabopolassar of Babylon, conquered Nineveh of the Assyrians, resulting later in the fall of the Assyrian Empire. Babylon took preeminence and then fought a war against the Lydians, which ended before the 583 BC episode. The peace settlement was negotiated between Media and Lydia through a king of Babylon, who Velikovsky is convinced was Nebuchadnezzar II in Ages of Chaos. This was the king of Babylon who destroyed Jerusalem just 2 years earlier. The scholar Velikovsky noticed that upon the monument describing this truce, the kings of Media and Lydia stand together holding up an eclipsed sun. This controversial historian also found an inscription from the same time of a king merciless, which reads, "Why I marched toward the land Assisi, the sun became obscured." At this time, in the Far East, another calendar was born. In 583 BC, the first emperor of Japan began his rule in this year according to the Nihon Shoki, Chronicle of Japan, beginning the Japanese regnal list. At this time, there seems to be a revival of the Sons of the Sun traditions in the East. It was also an Asian custom to begin a newer dynasty overthrowing the older ones when any disaster affected the land, considering this to be the mandate of heaven. The darkenings of the sun that terrified the ancients in 2239 BC, 1687 BC, 1135 BC, and 583 BC are the foundations to the universal traditions of the four suns, or 4 ages of mankind. Each of these Phoenix transits was 552 years apart, or 4 orbits of Phoenix at 138 years each. The period of time in world history encompassed exactly 1,656 years. 552 times 3. From the Great Flood in 2239 BC to the sun darkening of 583 BC, stopping the Medes and Lydians. This 1,656-year period mirrors the 1,056 years that counted down to the deluge. For as we have seen, the Great Flood was dated by the ancients as occurring in the 1,656 year of the Old World's calendar. This means that the Great Flood of 2239 BC was a major Old Bronze Age isometric epicenter, marking the conjunction of two 1,656-year periods going backwards and forwards in time, a 3,312-year period beginning in 3895 BC and ending in 583 BC. This chronological revelation is made all the more profound by this author's discovery that the independent writer and chronologist Stephen Jones claimed 3895 BC as year 1 on the ancient world's calendar, which was a date he arrived after conducting an extensive study of biblical passages, the Book of Jasher's chronological references, and the Assyrian records. His work is filled with chronological data and charts and is entitled Secrets of Time, a monumental work of genius. That the beginning of this grand isometric projection was the start of the original Hebrew calendar, before corruption by the rabbinical torture of older text, would now imply that the end of this timeline would have some significance to the Phoenix. For Phoenix visitations to the inner system are the absolute foundation to biblical chronology. The year 583 BC, which ends this 3,312-year period, 1,656 plus 1,656, was exactly 24 orbits of Phoenix, which reappears every 138 years. However, this year ended the age of the Phoenix. 4 darkenings of the sun, 2239, 1687, 1135, and 583 BC, were remembered by the ancients as the 4 sun ages, immortalized upon the Aztec stone of the 5th sun, excavated by the Spanish in 1790 AD. Known also as the Calendar Stone, this 20-ton relic depicts 4 distinct historical disasters caused or linked to the sun, but also predicts a 5th cataclysm involving the sun. The relic is adorned with images of earthquakes, comets, and destruction. The age of the Phoenix came to an end at this time because it failed to visually appear at the appointed time. Our predecessors kept track of the Phoenix cycles, knowing that it reappeared to darken the sun every 552 years. And when the sun darkens, we find evidence that at certain years the Assyrians expected its appearance and the Babylonians renamed their kings in honor of Phoenix reappearances. Remember, Thales of Miletus predicted and published widely the news of the darkening of the sun in 585 BC, claiming that it would occur in 2 years, 583. The next scheduled appearance should have been in 31 BC, but the sun did not darken. This was the final date inscribed upon an Olmec-style stele, and it was the year of the famous Battle of Actium between Mark Antony and Cleopatra's combined Roman and Egyptian-Greek forces against Octavian. During this battle, a major earthquake afflicted Greece and Judea, evidence of the powerful mass of Phoenix passing close by, but invisible in the daytime because it did not transit between Earth and the sun. Though the legend of the Phoenix died out at this time, the scientific records did not. At about this time, the philosopher naturalist Lucretius wrote a stunning poem over 7,300 lines in length and declared that some unknown body, not the moon, darkens the earth at a fixed time. Less than a century later, the famous Roman writer, geographer, and historian Pliny the Elder would write that these long, drawn-out eclipses of the sun were mysterious, not caused by the moon, and their cause was hidden by the rarity of their occurrence. This reminds one of a passage in Breaking the God Spell by Neil Freer. A careful analysis of the historical facts shows that the scholars of ancient times had a great deal more accurate information available to them than most historians have judged, and the scientific traditions preceding them were of a much higher level. Recently, while reading A History of the Olympics after When the Sun Darkens was released in 2009, this author literally came out of his seat when happening upon a reference to a series of destructive earthquakes that occurred in the year 522 AD. In this year, Olympia was ruined and Greece afflicted. As this was during the Dark Ages, we are fortunate to even have this record. As readers of Anunnaki Homeworld will know, the year 522 AD was the only year in world history that both the planet Phoenix and the planet Nibiru entered the inner system on their 138-year and 792-year orbits. These long-period, highly elliptical orbits are fully explained in Anunnaki Homeworld. It had bothered this author considerably that he could find no references to evidence of the passages of these planets. What links the quakes to Phoenix so strongly is the fact that this was 552 years after the earthquakes that afflicted the Aegean and Judea in 31 BC. The Phoenix cycles remain true after 538 BC, though the sun does not always darken, because Phoenix is not in alignment with Earth's orbit anymore. 552 years after 583 BC was 31 BC. And 552 years later, after 31 BC, was the year 522 AD. Phoenix can orbit out of planetary alignment so that it passes through the inner system, but not in between Earth and the Sun, because Earth is somewhere else on its orbital path around the Sun. As a result, Phoenix falls out of memory. Men forget about the legends of the Phoenix, and the 552-year cycle is no longer remembered because it lacks relevance. The planet Phoenix was not seen again until 1764 AD, when the astronomer Hoffman witnessed a dark circle obscuring 1/5 of the sun's surface through a telescope in the month of May. Many people all over Europe looked up and saw this obscuration with the naked eye. This partial transit is indicative that the Phoenix object was beginning to realign with its historic and apocalyptic orbital cycle. 522 AD was 1,242 years before 1764 AD, or 9 orbits of Phoenix at 138 years each. In Nostradamus' letter to King Henry of France, he relates that in his pre-flood chronological studies that he found that there were 1,242 years from Adam to Noah. This arbitrary sum is too specific to ignore. It reveals that there were historical chronologies available to the prophet that have been since lost. He described 9 orbits of Phoenix, 1,242 years. The sum of 1,242 years is exactly half that of 484 years, which is the duration of time, according to the Greek naturalist Aristarchus, that occurred between catastrophes. These men had access to chronological records we no longer possess. Nostradamus was Catholic by necessity, the religion imposed upon his Jewish parents. The Israelites long ago were aware of the 138-year orbit of Phoenix, and so were the Egyptians, as shown in When the Sun Darkens. We know that Nostradamus received a private education from the elders of his Jewish community before he left on his own for academic training. In a letter written by Nostradamus to his son Caesar, translated by Carlo Patrian, we learn that Nostradamus was privy to various historical and prophetic volumes that had been hidden for centuries. We are also aware that the prophet was a student of the chronological research of the scholar Trimethius, whose own work was published in 1522 AD. As 1764 AD saw the realigning of planet Phoenix to transit between Earth and the Sun, and counting 138 years later, we arrive at 1902 AD, when our planet passed through an immense strewn field of debris and the entire world was blanketed in dust and mud. The year before, in 1901, the Cincinnati Astral Society published a prediction that a new comet would appear soon and that it orbited an unknown planet. 1 year later, in 1902, astronomers discovered Comet Morehouse and admitted that it orbits not the Sun, but some other body. Nostradamus historian David Oveson, in his The Secret of Nostradamus, wrote, that the prophet employed the lunar timeline of Trimethius in quatrain 148, which reads, "The sun will take the remaining days, and then is accomplished the end of my prophecy." Ovison believes that this quatrain pinpointed the year 1901 AD as beginning the last days of the sun. The sun is the center of all our calendrical systems. It is my belief that the prophet actually targeted the year 1902, and this would have remained simply as wishful conjecture had it not been for the amazing discovery of another Nostradamus text. In 1994, members of the Italian National Library in Rome discovered, buried in their archives, a formerly unknown and unpublished manuscript, fully illustrated with paintings and text personally done by the prophet Nostradamus. After studying this work, the Roman researcher and Nostradamus expert Ottavio Cesare Ramadi published in his book Nostradamus, the Lost Manuscript, the following passage, written by the prophet, which refers to the year 1903. "Many will die before the phoenix dies. Until 670 his dwelling shall endure." Ramadi's timeline could have easily started in 1902 without disrupting his research. The reference to Phoenix cannot be understated. As will be shown in this book, the prophet Nostradamus not only knew of the existence of this terrible planet, but also knew the exact year of its return, and he was not the only one. Ramadi's research claims that some of the quatrains are coded, and this passage was decoded from 253. Thus far, we can conclude that Nostradamus knew that 1. Phoenix appeared in 1902 to begin its final countdown. 2. Phoenix is associated to the sun and moon, therefore, it is a celestial body. 3. Phoenix is associated to world chronology. 4. Phoenix is associated to end-time prophecies. 5. Phoenix is connected to the death of many peoples. 6. Phoenix will come to an end. Now we shall set out to prove just this.